high history of the castle, just to bring you up to date. There's not a lot that recounts that happened at the castle. The history is in the fabric of the building, understanding the time period through what is left there. But obviously you're all very aware of what happened in February 2021 with that awful photo. And Jason is here to say a bit more about that. Thank you.
Lovely job. I'd like to thank Linda for that. And what she's given you is a real overview of Hurst. And you can probably really get a sense of the evolution that Hurst has been through. You know, it keeps changing. And unfortunately, for me, it's quite easy because the part I'm talking about now is a very short moment in time. But it's quite hard also because it's quite personal for us because it's happening right now. But this is modern history. You know, this is what's happened to the castle. It's a very old building. It's had, you know, the fabric of the building has evolved over time. There's been many, many evolutions of it. Unfortunately, the sea's got in there and we have a weakness within the structure now. So I'll try and give you an overview of how we saw things developing. Obviously, we work very closely with English Heritage. They've been very supportive, and I think sometimes there's been a little bit of miscommunication between local people and ourselves and, you know, and English Heritage. So I'll try and clear up some of those, really. That is a very, very tough picture to look at in some ways, but in a way, it's also, if you like, the stress has gone out of the building. That was really struggling. But before that, I think if we go back, so that was 2 years ago. If we look back probably another year, 18 months before that, the West Wing was very much in danger at the time. The wooden groins around the front, so there are sea defences around the front there. The wooden groins had started to sort of give one or two weaknesses through it, and then, as we know, the sea gets in there, and it just tore out two sections. That allowed the sea to get in behind the sea defences and create an in and an out. And effectively, that just washed underneath the castle. So the first signs that we had were not actually of this massive breach, which is very evident, and that's the east wing, and it's the big dramatic thing. Probably the bigger problem is to go west. So if we look at the west end first. The west end had been underpinned, and successfully underpinned. Unfortunately, at that time, as a 60-metre section of wall that's just come away from the back section of the castle. I think it's only out about 2 degrees, 3 degrees, but that's quite a significant amount in there. The wooden groins were then reinforced, but during this point, we've had a lot more erosion on the east wing. Okay, so the west wing is a lovely big straight wall, and it's almost self-supporting to a point. Everybody's nervous of it, but it is self-supporting. The east wing here, when it had a relatively small amount of erosion, the way that the tension held itself in that massive castle, it just literally, the only way I can describe it, and both myself and Linda watched it unfortunately fall over, was it ejected into the sea. So there was tremendous force within it. It was a very, very still day. We had we had structural engineers on site observing this, trying to monitor it. So there was a lot of work already going on behind the scenes. Unfortunately, when it got to this point and the noises were quite tremendous, everybody realised we were in a critical situation. We evacuated that section of the castle. Myself and Linda went onto the beach to literally stop people from walking in front of there. We had no warning that this was going to go. So it was quite a dramatic situation that arose. So like I say, February, a couple of years ago. So that picture is literally just after the first collapse there. So we pop on there. Now, English Heritage, what's happened down there has been very reactive, and it's still reactive at the moment. So we are now, unfortunately, the footpath around the front, but they've delivered 22,000 tonnes of rock and shingle just to put a protective force just in front of that breach in the east wing. By no means have we even discussed how to begin repairing it. This is purely preventative at the moment. Any more damage is where we've got to. So I understand from a local point of view, it can be frustrating to see that huge scar. We're obviously very shocked to see what happened. And it feels like a slow process, but I feel like it's the correct process at the moment. It's obviously very, very involved. That's the first breach there. So if you notice, there is still rock within the breach. This was the first rock armour that was delivered to go around the outside of that breach and protect it, but also to protect the guys who were working within the breach. So we now have two problems. We have a breach in the wall with a significant amount of rock on the beach, but we also have to get in around there to try and shore up what's left of the castle. And one of the ways they did that was, so there's one of the workmen there, you can see the sea in behind there. Now that was to allow the guys an access road in at a safe distance, they could get around the breach, to be protected from the sea, to begin resin bonding. So what they did is they injected resin, which is kind of like a form of making the beach into a concrete, into a strong structure. So they drilled down and injected a foam resin, which set underneath either side of the breach to try and shore up that area, because obviously it's imperative they made it safe before we allowed machines into that area. So that rock groin that you see now, I think we're on our third evolution. So it's the same rock that was delivered very, very quickly and set on site, and it served three purposes. The first stage here was to protect the initial damage that was happening there and allow the guys access to remove it. There we go. This is the second evolution. So just in behind there, you can see the initial rock armour has pulled back in slightly, and there's a definite road in behind there. So they've allowed that. The third thing that you may or may not notice is just by the breach itself, or the rocks on the floor, it's a bund. So if the castle fell down, it would stop any more material coming out into the sea. So it was worst case scenario, unfortunately. We didn't know what was going to move next, and it was very much a suck it and see stage until the engineers had really developed a plan. It was such a fluid situation we're in. The worry was if the rest of the east wing fell down, how could we contain it and make it safe? So that's this evolvement of the rock armour. So that meant the rock armour had moved back in a bit with a lot of shingle in behind it to just protect the castle itself. So this is the going back in time. So we're now looking at the New Forest District Council. This was the overrun that they had when they did the major beachworks. And some of you might remember the beachworks that happened 98, 99. This was Norwegian stone brought in, and they built a rock revetment around the western end, purely because they had some spare rock. And I think what it's proved is how well it works, you know. So that's been there for a few years now. And those of you who walk down there, you'll know it very well. So this is kind of where we're at. We're at this stage of what works, what doesn't work, what looks nice, what doesn't look nice is kind of beyond the realms of reality now. We're now into pretty much, I'm afraid, rock armour. I think it's pretty much agreed that that will be the way forward to protect the castle, but it's unsightly. I think that's the only negative they've come up with it. So the investigations works that we've had recently. So with the engineers on board, they're never going to be happy that things aren't going to fall over because it's already fallen over. So what they've done is they've gone back and reviewed the underpinning of the west wing as well as the east wing. So they've underpinned the east wing with the foam resin that's under there, but they're not sure how well that will work in a marine environment such as we have there. So what they've done is they've drilled down from the inside of the castle, some high-tech drilling gear there, and the ground investigation works has come up to try and prove if that is a correct method to go forward, because on the west wing, it's much more of a concrete that's flowed underneath. So both have been underpinned, both are working to a degree, but the monitoring systems we have there are so accurate. They are also measuring tidal differences, heat differences. So in the summer, the castle actually grows and contracts, and they can record a very, very incredible amount of data, which now, unfortunately, you have to decipher. You know, what are we going to do next? So with the underpinning works, I think that was a very reactive phase. We're now in a kind of sit and wait phase, unfortunately. Very frustrating for myself and all of you people who would love to go in there. But unfortunately, we have to go with the engineers on this. They have got some good data. They've come down at quite an angle. And one of the concerns, as you may know, on the island, it's slipper clay. And slipper clay is very weak. So the concern was the run of slipper clay came all the way across the Solent, popped up at Hurst, and the castle foundations were sat on a very weak base. I think they're confident now it's sat on a fairly stable shingle base. But again, the question is, what do we do? How do we go forward? So that's the phase we're at. This kind of brings us to this lovely picture, and this is where we've evolved to at the moment. So as you can see, the rock revetment is around the east wing. There's Norwegian rock at the far end there. In between, we have a weakness. So we have wooden groins, and we have an old wall, which is designed to protect the Tudor section. So these are going to be the next phases. So we're going to be looking at what happens to the wooden groins. Are they going to be repaired? Are they going to be updated? Can they be made stronger? And I think it was pretty quickly assessed that they may not be strong enough. They're okay for short term, but the rock revetment, as you can see there, it's very imposing. But that is kind of looking at a 50-year strategy. So if they rock armour the whole of the castle, there's potential for a 50-year strategy there. What it's doing is highlighting also our new island on the end, the alleged island. So the island is, as you can see there, jutting out, and it's not any part of the rock revetment or the beach works that have been going on for the council. It's purely the way that Hurst Spit evolves. And if you look behind the lighthouse there, above the lighthouse, you can see the old spits. So as a period of time, the whole spit is marching to the east. You know, we're only here for this brief period of time. For hundreds and hundreds of years, it has been moving to the east. It will continue to do so. We're just trying to slow the process down. So what's happened is the spit is built out to the east there. It's built that little spit out on its own. That couldn't sustain itself. It got too thin, and the tides cut through, and one storm just knocked it flat, and that's why we're looking at the island. So that's kind of brought you right back up to date with what's happened to the new Lentune Island, I believe it's been named in there. So yeah, and my personal view about being on the beach for a good few years now and chatting to my father and the like, the beach is fluid, unfortunately. We're dealing with nature. We're dealing with something that wants to move to the east. We're only slowing it down. I think with English Heritage, New Forest District Council, we are at risk. I think the castle is very much at risk, but everybody is doing the right thing and they don't want to inject money into the wrong place right now. So there's a little bit of a breathing space, a little bit of time, and then hopefully everybody will come up with a process that not only secures the castle, but also, you know, the greater spit, if you like. I think that's very important to bring up. Okay, so I think that is bringing you up. I'm sure there's going to be a few questions. So I'd like to hand you over to Chris now.
Right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I'm going to sort of say a little bit about Moshers, that's the Milford-on-Sea Historical Records Society, who has sort of come into this because we have been approached by Hurst Marine and English Heritage to do some ongoing historical research into the castle and the area around the castle. You have, I'm sure you've all seen that super book that Jude James wrote on the castle. It is, for us historians, a Bible. But of course, as time moves on, new sources open up to us for information. And we, the members of Moshers, as we call ourselves in Milford, have been asked to research all various aspects of the castle, from the building itself to the life on the spit, to going out and seeking people's reminiscences. I mean, I can speak because as a child I used to walk down there to see my uncles. But there are people here that will have their own personal memories of going down to Hurst and things that they have seen. Those are the people, or should I say, you are the people that we seek to speak to glean these bits of information which help provide a little piece here, another piece there, to the overall history of the castle and area. So what I'm doing, just to finish off this section, is to just show you a few things that have come to light since we started researching. Some of these will be familiar with you. Others, I would venture to suggest, you might be seeing for the first time. Obviously, sources, prints. Prints are a marvellous source, especially before you get to the age of the camera and the photograph. So here's a couple showing Hurst Castle, probably about the 1820s. Some you will see, especially the first one, there's two versions. There's one, the older one, which was seen just now, and the newer one where the artist has actually put in the Victorian rings. So you have before and after. But I'm going to show you something that I believe is unique and recently came into my personal collection. It is, to me, the earliest photographic view of Hurst Castle. It is a stereoscopic view, and it was being taken in the early to mid 1860s, because what you are viewing the main entrance to the Tudor castle. And where the guns are in front, the saluting battery, of course, you nowadays have the west wing. So, it is marvellous to know, in a sense, that there are things and objects, photographs, whatever, out there somewhere that need to be discovered. And that, I would venture to suggest, is a true discovery. Here we are, the picture of, you saw a view of the Castle Inn with the people outside. Well, to your left there, the white building is the Castle Inn at the turn of the last century, and the houses in the middle are all the Coast Guard cottages. And I can remember those being demolished, I think, 1980s, Jason? Yeah, 1980s. Now, once again, from personal people's collections, you find that here in the early 1900s, this ended up in someone's photographic album. The most important thing, I suppose, and I apologise for its faintness, the top one, you can actually see a man sat by one of the guns, one of those enormous Victorian guns that were taken away for demolition. And this is by the Camber. The two lower pictures, obviously you can see, being a spit, you are subject to ships going aground, and you've got part of a ship, shall I say, and then of course you've got a much further area of shingle in front of the castle, that being the western wing. Interesting to note that even in the early Edwardian times, people ventured to go down to the spit by bicycle. I certainly wouldn't, even today. So just some general views of the castle. Once again, these things can be very, very useful, especially if they are posted, because postage gives you a postmark which gives you a date. So you can say with authority that the view was taken either at the time of the postmark or before, but certainly not after. Some more of the castle, and the top one to my right, to my left, gosh. Once again, you can see whether it's a shade or not, but you can see how the shingle moves, because it does look as if there is a shingle bank to the Needles side of the castle. And then, of course, below, anything associated with Hurst Castle, HMS Hurst Castle. She was in a corvette. How long did she last in service? 3 months before she was sunk off of Ireland. There are several views of the castle again, and the lighthouse. And of course, the lighthouse is interesting because some of us who have lived locally for a few years, let's put it that way, will remember, of course, the pine tree by the lighthouse, which over the years has been replaced. But was quite a feature. There we are, more of the castle. Down at the quay in Keyhaven, and I tend to believe that the chap in the boat was Ernie. Ernie Meffin was one of the ferry people down to the castle when I was a young lad, and he actually had a cafe in a hut by the lighthouse, now long since gone. The other one on the opposite side from that, you will see the Coast Guard lookout section, which was on the spit. And I can remember as a youngster, so I'm talking now about the 1960s, that there was just a little bit of that remained on the edge of the spit as you walked to the castle. In fact, it was one of those things that children did to play daredevil, run to it, and hopefully the waves didn't catch you in the process. But that gives you a real idea of how the spit has moved throughout time, and comparatively recent time. several more views of the castle. And this one's one of my favourite, because you never know what information may come up. The printed paper advertises a boys' camp during the interwar period. It was run by the TOC-H movement in Milford. The postcard alongside you will see that there are people kicking a ball in what is the East Wing. I venture to suggest that that could well be some of the children from that camp. So during the war, even though, or between the wars, even though it was still used by the military, permission was gained, and every year there was a TOC-H boys' camp. There we are. And as I've said to you, why do we need research? We need to grow the story. The story is timeless because, as we all know, today is the history tomorrow. So our memories, our recollections are all part of this ceaseless story called Hurst, the Castle and the Spit. Thank you.
Did you want to?
Thank you very much. That was wonderful. Very interesting. I'm sure that there are lots of questions. So who's going to kick off?
Can you tell us what happened to the houses that are still there? I'm sorry, were you pointing at me?
No.
I'll do it from here first. Go on, sorry.
I was just asking what's happening to the houses, the house with the chimney in the middle?
Shall I answer? Yep. So that one, I believe, at the moment there is some local interest, and possibly the gentlemen who have bought the spit that's recently come up for sale will be looking to renovate it. So they're approaching English Heritage to see. It's going to have to fit in with a lot of criteria, but it is a very heavily listed building. But we're hoping that there's some funding there to renovate the building. So yeah.
That was the Castle Keeper's Cottage, is that what you meant?
Or that's the Lighthouse Keeper's Cottage, I believe.
Lighthouse, sorry. Is that what the one you meant? So that's the one nearest to the lighthouse?
Yes, yep. That's the
There's only
Lighthouse
two
Keeper's.
buildings that survive, so of all of the cottages that were there, they've all been pulled down, and it's
Yeah.
just those
So
two
we are
cottages
hoping to
there.
have a new roof on it to weather tight, and off we go.
Sorry, the gentleman at the back? Yeah, hello.
First of all, thank you very much for most of it. Is it working? The light green lights on? Yes, that's right. First of all, thank you very much for a most interesting talk from all three of you, which I find very informative. Oh, we're working now. Very informative. Even though I've lived here 10 years, there's always something I can learn about the castle. I've got 3 points I want to raise. The first 2 really are for Chris. You talked about, or Linda talked about King Charles being imprisoned in the castle, but I also understand that a Franciscan priest was imprisoned in the castle for 30 years. So that's the first point I want to ask, if you can deal with that. But I've got a second point, I'll give it to you first of all. And the second point is that when I've been to the Spit, I've seen there was a little railway running from the castle entrance to a jetty, which is very run down. My question is, what was the jetty used for? Were supplies and goods brought along the Spit, or were they brought in by sea? And the final point is for you both, Jason and Linda. My wife went to a talk on climate change on Wednesday, which I suppose a few people here might have attended as well. And one of the points they raised was that to assist with climate change, we might have to breach the Spit to allow the water to come through to keep the levels going. Now, I don't know whether you've heard anything about that, but I'll leave those 3 points with you, if I may.
I'll do the history bit and give them a chance to think about the last one. Yes, you are quite correct. Hurst Castle acted as a prison for a chap called Father Paul Atkinson. He was sentenced because he was Roman Catholic, and it was during the time when you were not supposed to take services. You know, being a Protestant country, we were very much in that period worrying about a Catholic revival and even on occasions a Catholic invasion, as you think of Bonnie Prince Charlie and the Stuarts. He was there, I've got a feeling, for almost 20, I was going to say 30 years, but I'm told 28, so it's not too bad. I'm allowed a little bit of leeway. And originally, we are led to believe that he had pretty much an open imprisonment. In other words, he could go out from the castle. But I'm told, and I have read, that there was various people that complained about the fact. And so the latter part of his imprisonment, he actually decided that he would stay within the castle walls. He is buried in a churchyard in Winchester. So, that's...
When he died.
And it was 74. She's read the notes. Well done. Thank you. So hopefully that answers your bit on Father Paul. Your other one was the railway and the jetty. I should be shot down if I say it wrong, so I'll put my head on the block. But I am of the opinion that the railway and the jetty were used to bring ammunition and stores in during the period leading up to the First World War, the time when the two wings were added on, when once again we had the threat of invasion from France. So that would have been the easiest way to undoubtedly bring the stores in from the jetty and then onto the railway line and into the respective wings and into the areas of the castle that housed the armaments and stores. So, cool. Okay?
Yes.
Just to add to that, I think I'm never quite sure how it works, and I'm not quite sure how government works sometimes in the ministry, but the main supply route for Hurst was from the Isle of Wight, traditionally from the island. So we used to have workers, the Department of Environment workers that came across. They still carried on that tradition. So for many years, the guys were brought across from the island every day by boat. And one of the biggest problems when there was a garrison stationed at Hurst was fresh water. So the nearest fresh water supply was apparently on the island, and the easiest way to bring volume in was to bring it over by boat and land on the outside there. So that was...
Today, he still brings it, don't you?
Yeah, we still have to bring water down there, unfortunately. One of our biggest logistical challenges is water and fuel. It's basically like a ship down there. It has nothing, so you have to make your own. And I'm sure the meeting you're talking about is the strategy, which is, I believe, Keyhaven to Lymington, the Environment Agency one. We, as a stakeholder, we've been involved from the start. There's some interesting ideas, and I love the fact that all ideas were considered, and I think they were very much explaining that is the process they're in at the moment. There's two shoreline management policies. One is the BCP and an FDC joint one, which is Christchurch through to Milford, and then you pick up with Milford through to Lymington, which is the larger Environment Agency one, which is also an FDC sit on as well. So they're quite important, and the knowledge they have of Hurst is very important. Hurst is described as the cornerstone of that project. They don't really know where they're going to be, but as you probably understand, there's some terms like hold the line, or they're going to recede some areas. I think when I mentioned the rock revetment, I mentioned the fact that it had been designed to last for the 50-year strategy. So they have a 50-year strategy, a 100-year strategy, depending on water level rises as they predict. So English Heritage and dealing with an FDC shoreline management policy are currently looking at a 50-year projection. So they'll be building, I think it's 1.3 metres is the number, above what we see water level now. And I think that's heading towards the 100-year projection. So, they're factoring it in, and I've seen many, many different ideas about the spit, and I think one of those was, to do nothing. It's the hold the line policy versus do nothing, and I think what you'll find is a series of strategies for each individual area that will be compromised between various different things, but I think at the moment they're at wish list stage, but I think it's good that they are putting everything out there. I don't think it's a bad thing. Okay.
Hello, thank you very much for a very, very interesting talk. I'd like to add something to the very origins of the castle in the 1540s, and it relates to the hoard of gold coins. not from the castle itself, but from the mainland, and I'm not at liberty to say where it comes from. But suffice it to say that it's a hoard of coins ending with Henry VIII, about 1540, and that coincides with two events. One is, of course, the building of Hurst Castle. The other is the dissolution of Christchurch Priory, which takes place at more or less the same sort of time. And it's a lot of unused gold coins. Probably those coins may have been part of the money which for the project of building Hurst Castle, which was a very expensive project according to the history of King's Works. So it's conceivable that that was money that was stolen and then deposited as a hoard, but had been projected to go towards the construction of Hurst Castle. And ultimately, it may have come from the suppression of the monasteries.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you know that? Have you heard that story? No. See, this is exactly why we're now working with a Milford gain all this information.
There's rumours or backchat, as it were, as to why it would be in our generation that the shingle bank was perhaps breached, and would that have anything to do with too much removal of shingle over the 20th century at the other end of the Christchurch Bay?
I would suggest that we need to look further to the west, and I think this is why it's important that Bournemouth and Poole Council are working with NFDC now for the bigger picture. I think the whole strategy for Christchurch Bay is changing, and I think when you look at where our material comes from, if you stopped material falling into the sea at Barton, Hengistbury, you know, we're looking at a much bigger picture now, and I think the understanding is beginning slowly, unfortunately, but I think it's beginning to understand partially why there's no more recharge at Hurst. You know.
And presumably the groins didn't help that they were put in the Victorian time, were they?
I think again, it's this much bigger picture. Is the offshore dredging affecting it? Where does the shingle go to when it goes back out to sea? There is obviously vast amounts of shingle moving. We're only trying to clamour onto one little bit of it, but of course everybody else is along the coast. And if you looked at the bigger strategy for the Environment Agency, if you let that spit roll back, I believe it will continue to roll back but at a much lower height. But will that affect the average wave height in the area? Who knows? So I think that, you know, I think the awareness is getting better in the whole thing. I think we are one of the last pieces in the chain. You know, we're right at the end of it. We're at the extremity. The way that geography works and nature works together, you know, I think the understanding is getting better and better. But I'm still intrigued. Every time I go to a meeting, we hear a different opinion, and it's good to hear. I think the fact it's being voiced.
Got better as
Communication's
well.
a lot better.
Communication's got better now, which is a really good
I used to
thing.
dread to hear a multi-agency meeting, whereas actually now we get invited onto them, and they're actually quite a nice thing. I don't think there's any plan set in stone yet, and I think Environment Agency they've changed their policies on engaging with public and stakeholders. You probably have that involvement yourselves. It's an interesting process.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks. Hello.
Thank you. I'm interested, you've shown that in all of your talks, you've shown that there have been substantial numbers of soldiers stationed there and quite considerable numbers of guns of various sorts over the historical period. One of the things about guns, and I speak as a military person, is that you have to fire them in order to make sure that your crews know what they're doing, to work out ranging to certain places. Do you have any evidence of what they used as targetry, whether they towed target vessels down the Solent, or what did they do?
Yeah, we've got 2 target plates at the castle that still exist. They're in the West Wing, so hopefully, you know, we'll be able to open that again to the visitors, and that shows they've got a massive hole in, haven't they? So they were towed out by boat, we believe, and then, you know, fractures fired from there.
And I think there is evidence of when it was a practice day, they had to open all the windows on the spit, and there's evidence of that. So that's kind of the knowledge that we want to capture, that's what brings the spit to life. I think the castle itself has been documented quite well, but where Chris has come in and the help we've asked for is to document the lost community of Hurst, really. There's been a lot of people involved.
Yeah, and life on the spit, that's what I was trying to explain. The history that we've got is the fabric of the building. We don't have any of these stories. We have one story, the one that I quoted about. We just don't have that information. What was it like for a soldier to be there? What was their job? What was their day-to-day life? And, we know Bill now, the last commanding officer, but there's just so much we don't know. And it's not documented, so we have to ask people. We have to try and get hold of these families that have been... Their ancestors were there and see if there's any stories that they've heard and try and capture those real stories, which is why we've started to work with Chris and hopefully we can sort of learn from all these stories that have just come out this evening, just things like that, just gain some information. And that's the fascinating part for me. Anyone else? No?
On that note, I will thank you all very much indeed. That was really interesting. And thank you all, you and your team.
We kickstart the season with our Easter activities, so if there's any grandchildren or younger members of the community that you're friends with, bring them along. We've got lots of Easter activities happening. And the castle will be open 7 days a week from the 1st of April through to the 31st of October. Ferry departs from Keyhaven at 10 o'clock and runs approximately every 20 to 30 minutes over to the castle. So do come along and hopefully we'll see you over there. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your generosity with our fundraiser. If anybody's feeling even more generous on the way out, please do. And we'll see you on the 14th of April for a talk about the Mary Rose.
Thank you.